So what I'm going to do now is hand it over to Dr. Burkhead, who can introduce the panel and also start by introducing our two speakers who we haven't heard from yet. So Brandon, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, hello, thanks. So that was a fantastic presentation and really excited to dig into it with the question and answer. So wanted to introduce the rest of the panel that we have here, which will be Matthew Stout, who is the co-founder and CEO of Applied VR, has been working with Applied VR for over 5 years now, longer than several VR researchers that I know, and just been really working hard to get it into as many hospitals as possible. Last I heard, I think it was over 250 hospitals using that type of, using their services and their products. And then Dr. Kate Donovan, who I have a great time with. She is, for those that are nerds or nerdy enthusiasts, just reading her bio is just a fun time. She is the clinical director for immersive technologies for the Innovation Digital Health Accelerator at Boston Children's. She's also the Innovation Technology Coordinator for the Medicine Patient Service at Boston Children's Hospital and co-founder of Hacking Pediatrics. I've gotten to meet with her and hang out with her at several hackathons, just have a wonderful time. And you know, anything with peds and VR is just a great conversation. So really looking forward to having all of our speakers and panelists talk today. And so I'll be kind of posting these questions to our list of speakers, and I want to start off with Dr. Cogburn asking, one of the questions we have here is, look, after watching the video, could this be useful for resolving current inequalities in the medical world? And what would you need to change to target specific concerns in those areas?
Are you hearing me?
Yep.
I think these issues of my background is health and humility, saying issues emerge health that all varying from healthcare of social systems on health. Plans, use type senior leadership in medical and health settings, but they really understand these issues, which are practical, important just to begin.
Awesome. There's actually another question that's from one of our colleagues here at Cedars, asking about how this content with implicit bias could specifically target for the pregnancy experience of Black women as it relates to the maternal mortality crisis, which disproportionately affects Black moms.
Right. Their value component or additionally important policy and for care, the differences that we observe the mortality, but again also how environments contribute the outcomes.
Right. I would like to ask the next question and pivoting it towards Kate, asking about, you know, how's everything been since post-COVID? You know, your program within pediatrics, how have things changed?
I think for ourselves, in addition, first of all, I want to say thank you to everyone for this invite. This is awesome. I keep learning things when I go to these conferences, so thank you so much for this. As far as the program development is concerned, we definitely have shifted a bit to how do we educate our clinicians a little bit better. I work at Boston Children's Hospital. It's an academic facility, and we are putting things on hold to accommodate COVID, but how do we use virtual reality in a different way? Virtual reality at Boston Children's Hospital falls under the umbrella of our simulation program, which makes sense. It's a great use case. So currently we're exploring opportunities for multi-user simulations so we can educate our new clinicians that are coming through, that for our medical folks as well as our nurses and staff. So that, I think the shift really has moved over in that way for the current environment.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Awesome. The next question we can have is to Matthew, and kind of a similar thing. So we're learning a little bit about how hospitals can relate to the current challenges and adapt to the current challenges. How does that work from a startup standpoint, adapting to the challenges that are present?
Thanks. First of all, Brennan, always great to hear your speeches. Every time you speak, I always learn something new, and it's fantastic, even though we've been partners for a long time here. Before I actually jump in and answer that quick question, I do have a shout out for Dr. Courtney Cogburn. So every Monday, we get together, ever since COVID hit, we get together and we have one employee that we pick at random, provide an inspirational video to talk, to get everybody fired up for the mission that we have at Applied VR to help people address their pain, whether it be acute or chronic. And this Monday, literally, just coincidentally, timed with this talk today, one of our employees pulled up the TEDx talk that Dr. Cogburn had delivered. I'm not sure.
Do we might have lost you for a second?
We got bandwidth problems today, I guess, right at the culminating moment of his remark. Well, let's get Matthew back on, but while we're waiting for him for that grand finale.
Yeah. I guess I'll move on to another question. So another question, if we'll come back, but one question that was asked is VR for children going into surgery. What does that look like? So Kate, do you have any thoughts on VR for surgery? Is that a pretty common use case for you?
Yeah, actually, I think it's really quite interesting as I shift focus a little bit when I'm creating VR experiences. I work with the patients and the families. I get the lens from the patients and families for any project that I use at Boston Children's. I think it's really important to understand your end user. So with that being said, we're actually working with our teen advisory committee at Boston Children's, developing education for surgical procedures. And the kids were able to go into the operating room, identify where their anxiety consisted of, and we're using 360 video to create experiences for them to explore the areas prior. In addition to that, we have also created at Boston Children's an app called Health Voyager. It's not necessarily operating room specific, but it does help kids engage with diagnosis from a GI procedure. So it incorporates the findings of upper endoscopies, lower endoscopies, and the clinicians will populate an app, and then they can see that in virtual reality. And again, when we think of our end users, this actually was an educational moment for us where the kids actually use VR, small little VR goggles to view this on their phones. They can engage with this, they can educate their friends and family with this. But when we were doing the initial education, we realized that we were actually moving the parent from what the child was experiencing. So we made a companion iPad app so they were able to experience that as well. And I think that's one of the differences when we talk about virtual reality with pediatrics, is that you also have to take into consideration the parents. When we're putting a headset on a child, we're completely removing them from the environment, which leaves a very anxious parent by themselves. Mm-hmm. So we need to come up with solutions to engage them and have them understand some of the powerful indications for virtual reality. Does that answer most of that?
Yeah, that was great. Yay. A lot of good stuff. A lot of good stuff.
I could talk for hours, you know that.
Well, want to make sure we engage the team.
Brandon, I'd like to hear from sort of everyone. Today we heard some incredible research, we heard some incredible science, new discoveries, but the question, a theme that keeps coming up is why aren't more people using virtual reality? And what are the major barriers to implementation? We've touched on it, but I'd be curious, from each of you very briefly, like why doesn't every police department use virtual reality for implicit bias training, and should they? Why doesn't every school? Why doesn't every health system have a chronic pain program using virtual reality, and same thing with pediatrics. I'd just be curious if maybe starting with Courtney, if you have sort of some high-level thoughts about that. What do we need to do next to get this out there?
A lot of it's already happening, and I liked kind of Dr. Lewis's framing around this, which suggests that at what point are we ready to deploy versus at what point are we in the research phase? And I think we take a very traditional academic approach to VR. We need to get all the data and read all the papers to really feel confident deploying it. And I think we need to come to some kind of compromise around that. At what point are we comfortable actually deploying this into society so that we can use it? But I think, people are working with VR for police and physicians and in education. I mean, we've covered the turf. It's a matter of getting it into the hands of people who can actually use it and test it out in the field.
Definitely.
What do you think, Beth?
Yeah, so you raise a really good point, which is what is it going to take to get true adoption at scale? I mean, we have a scalable intervention, a scalable treatment, but how do we get adoption at scale? And I think the field of implementation science really teaches us that we need to be examining the barriers to adoption at the individual level, at the systems level, the organizational level, at the national level. And I think these remain understudied or potentially unstudied, that we have been focusing on efficacy. We're focusing on the benefits, but we haven't yet sort of studied these barriers and developed systems that really include all the stakeholders. So, I loved Dr. Cogburn's description about how the team includes all of these representative stakeholders, but we need to have policymakers at the table. We need to have CEOs and healthcare administrators at the table, and we need to collectively understand from their perspective what it's going to take to move to the next level so that we have a VR headset in every household in America, or something of that nature.
What about you, Kate?
I think one of the challenges in getting it into the environment is that the people who adopted it first were the gaming folks. So because, I'm coming from the pediatric lens, because the gaming folks have adopted this, people look at this as a game versus a potential for pain management, a potential for empathy, to expose people to the operating room prior to procedures. So when you are working with those stakeholders in the C-suite to try to get funding for these things, a lot of times that lens is based on you want to work and get more games into the hospital for the kids, when in reality we want to use it for clinical needs. So I think from my perspective, I think it just needs to shift. One of the things for myself is I always, even when I go to the IRB, I bring a headset with me so the people I'm working with understand exactly what VR is. Because without that, to explain it, and everyone who has not used VR and then used VR totally understands, you really need to experience it to really get a full understanding of the potential.
That's a great tip. Hey, Brandon, I don't want to jump on your toes, but I saw Matthew was back, and I don't know. He texted me and said his internet went out, and now he's back, and now he's gone again, because he was about to tell us the rest of his story about Courtney. Oh, are you back with us?
I hope I am. Do you guys hear me all right?
You were just telling us that your employee had showed the TEDx video of Dr. Cogburn.
Yeah, literally, she played the video of Dr. Cogburn, and both Josh, my co-founder, and I asked her, well, did you know that actually Dr. Cogburn is speaking with us tomorrow on the VMed webinar? And she had no idea. It was just very fortuitous that she shared that, and it's very relevant, obviously, to when we think about the power of VR. The ability to stand in someone else's shoes and truly see it from their perspective is what this is all about, and ties back directly to obviously the opening of your whole presentation here. So just in a matter of a couple days, she's sort of become a hero in our company, giving inspiration to what we do. So it was just a quick shout out. I
appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. So.
Go ahead, Brandon. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you. Yeah. So we were just going to ask, I guess, Matthew, how you how has Applied kind of been looking at the challenges facing us as far as the distance, the lockdown, but also you talked a little bit about some of the companies, what they've been doing for their Mondays to help with the empathy that's needed. So just interested to hear your thoughts on that. We actually, just while you were gone, asked about how we can get this implemented on a societal level. So what are the barriers that we haven't yet touched?
So it's Brendan at one of his many speeches previously had said, the question of VR is not does it work. I think there's ample evidence now that demonstrates that it absolutely works. The question is, how do we actually bring it to market in a scalable way that can help people, whether those patients are in the hospital or at the home or wherever they are. And so our belief ultimately is, one, first and foremost, it starts with the clinical evidence that we have. And the industry as a whole, I think, has done a great job of building that evidence. Second piece of it is, though, just having clinical evidence isn't enough. You've got to be able to demonstrate that patients are willing to put it on and that it's easy to use. If you look at the headsets that we had just even 2 or 3 years ago, and Brennan showed a picture of the patient that had the wow look on his face as he had a Samsung Gear on his head, even that, which was simply taking a cell phone and putting it into a headset, seems like it should be a simple thing. But when we've done work together with Cedars-Sinai, and we would send those types of devices to the home, when you're actually getting where a patient's going to use this on a day-to-day basis, it was incredibly complicated, incredibly challenging, and we had a lot of failure points. The headsets have been the friction in the equation. With the advance of, or the advancements of the all-in-ones, that wasn't a evolutionary change, it was a revolutionary change that has now enabled us to really deliver something that is easy to use. So we always talk about that efficacy and that is it easy to use because patients skew older. And so, everything that we've been doing, and I think there's a lot of other great companies that have been really focused on how do you deliver something that is easy to use for the patient so they're not intimidated by it. That's the second piece of the equation. The third piece of the equation is ultimately who pays. And that's, Dr. Rob Lewis addressed this a little bit in terms of the bet that Hoag is making right now and saying, while we don't have a reimbursement, we're going to be able to accrue out of this, that the hospital is making a major investment. But ultimately, this comes down to building the HEOR data, health economics outcomes research, that is able to demonstrate that we can actually cut down the cost of care. And if you think about I think one of the biggest areas you're going to see that is when you take this into the home. And a lot of the great work that Cedars has been doing, that we've been doing in partnership with Beth Darnall, is all looking at how do we actually deliver the product into the home where we can create the greatest accessibility for patients, and we can also have the biggest opportunity to cut down that cost of care for the patients. So, and that's really what our focus has been right now. And the one thing I'll say about COVID is that this has truly been a catalyst. If you look, we talk about the 4 healths: home health, digital health, mental health, and telehealth. Telehealth, everyone knows that it's a good thing, but there was no reimbursement model for it that made sense at the time. COVID has been a catalyst that has actually accelerated what would have taken 5 to 10 years is now suddenly on the forefront of every payer, of CMS, all of that. And we think that you're seeing the same thing from payers' receptivity, patients' receptivity, who are now fearful of going into the hospitals, that there is a tidal wave that's coming. And it's about making sure that we are ready for it and that we have the evidence behind it, especially on the economic side, to justify the reimbursement for it.
Definitely. Well, I know we're getting close to the end here. I don't know if maybe we might do like a closing remark from each person, and or potentially we could do one more question. A lot of the questions seem to be around cost and insurance, which it seems like we might have just covered. So, I think everyone just kind of give a closing remark if you would like, or I know we're coming up on the time here.
Yeah, well, maybe I'll just jump in there for a second here. So, and on the cost issue, unfortunately, we won't solve that on this call, but I think we're all equally invested in trying to figure out how to develop both the scientific basis and the implementation science basis for being able to deploy the technologies for all these different use cases we've discussed today. I have been working with the American Medical Association to see if there's possibility of getting a CPT code around virtual analgesia, and there's been interest from the AMA, and I've been out there to Washington before COVID and presented this, and there was very strong enthusiasm around at least the concept of an ICD-10 code. So those are the first steps. The other really big opportunity here is the FDA. We haven't talked a lot about regulators today, but the FDA has established its new MXR program that stands for Medical Extended Reality. And just literally before we were all in lockdown, the week of that, we were all at FDA for the MXR inaugural conference, where we talked about all the use cases and the FDA's role as a regulator in overseeing the certification and clearance of different VR programs. So these are all just signs that federal government, the insurance companies, we've had support from Travelers Insurance. I know Matthew's team has been, I think, is it Aetna has supported some of their work. So a lot of people in positions of authority are interested in all this work. And we just have to keep chipping away at it. It's kind of feels a little Sisyphean sometimes because every year we come back and we don't have a clear-cut answer to this question. So we'll see what happens. But we are out of time and we've gone over a bit. So I think we're going to end it there. Despite some of the technical challenges, I think this was an outstanding webinar today. I want to thank everyone who participated and for your questions. We couldn't get to all of them, but I think we answered a lot of them throughout the presentations. We will be posting a video of this event on our website, so we'll make an announcement about that. And we will be featuring more events in the future. We might be changing our electronic platform, but we will continue the same spirit of what we've started today. And I want to thank all of our speakers for their time and energy and participation in today's meaningful event. So with that, thank you all for listening, and be safe, be well, and take care.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome.